Welcome to the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research. My name is Alex Weiser. I'm the Director of Public Programs of YIVO. We're so pleased to have you joining us today for a talk with our own Eddy Portnoy called English Jokes, Yiddish Punchlines, American Jewish Humor. This talk is a part of our YIVO 101 series. In honor of our 101st year, we decided to have a series exploring some of the really big topics that we touch on with some of the great scholars in our world. So we had a talk on the shtetl, myth versus reality, with Professor Samuel Kassow. And this is the second in the series with Dr. Eddy Portnoy, who is YIVO's own Senior Academic Advisor and Director of Exhibitions. Those of you out there may know Eddy from his exhibitions at YIVO. You may also know Eddy from his wonderful book, Bad Rabbi and Other Strange But True Stories from the Yiddish Press, which was published by Stanford University Press in 2017. If you don't know Eddy from this book, you should go run to the YIVO shop and get it right now. It's a fantastic book. It's fascinating. It's written in a way that you can't put it down, and it's amazing history and culture. So go check that out if you don't know it already. But I'm sure most of us have already read this wonderful book. For any of you out there that are new to YIVO, just say that we're a very special place for the celebration and contemplation of Jewish history and Jewish culture. We have a library and an archives with over 23 million documents and over 400,000 books, which are used by researchers around the world. And we make those materials available through digitization efforts, through reference archivists, and we bring them to life through public programs like this, through our classes, and through the wonderful exhibitions that Eddy curates for us. So if you're new to YIVO, welcome, and I hope you'll join us again. And welcome back to everyone who is a part of our community. So without further ado, I'm going to hand everything over to Dr. Eddy Portnoy. Eddy, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Alex. He's such a kind young man. Okay, happy Purim, everyone. A Freilichen Purim. The idea for this talk is, as we may have mentioned, thanks to YIVO's Director of Programming, Alex Weiser. So I think if you don't like it or if you have any complaints about anything, please send them to Alex. It's aweiser@yivo.org. Let's start out with a little caveat. I'd like to mention that some of the material in this talk might be considered by some people to be vulgar. So if you feel you might be offended by vulgar jokes, now is your time to slink out of the Zoom and maybe go get something to eat. Now, humor is the product of the social nature of humans. It's also an integral part of oral folklore, not just Jewish, but all folklore. When YIVO began collecting ethnographic material over 100 years ago, jokes and humor material were among the first things they collected. And we'll be looking at some of this material today. I also have to add that 100-year-old jokes, sometimes even year-old jokes, are sometimes no longer funny. They have lost their cultural context, and they really only exist as humorous relics of a bygone age. I think a lot of the jokes in this talk fall into this category, and in order to truly understand them, you have to consider them within the context of their time, whether that's a vaudeville theater or the smoky casino of the Homowack Hotel in the Catskills. In addition, I have to say that Zoom is a terrible venue for a talk like this because I can neither see nor hear any audience reactions. I don't even know if there is an audience. I could be talking to nobody. But with that said, let's just begin. Now, I would like to begin with the premise that Jews are not funny. If you consider the textual history of this people, from the Bible to the Mishnah to the Talmud and on to rabbinic responsa, there really aren't a lot of laughs. There are a few funny stories and some wordplay here and there, but for the most part, traditional Jewish texts tend to be pretty dry. This appears to be one of the reasons why 19th century social scholarship conceived of Jews as having no sense of humor. And I just realized that I need to share my screen. Let me start with that. I apologize for the interruption. Hopefully you can see this. And if you can't, someone will yell at me. Okay, This appears to be one of the reasons why 19th century social scholarship conceived of Jews as having no sense of humor. The French historian Ernest Renan, for example, argued that Jews were not funny at all. And he went as far as to say that, and I'm quoting, Semitic people lack the faculty to laugh. According to Renan, not only were Jews incapable of making jokes, but they did not even have the capacity to laugh at them. Additionally, the Scottish philosopher Thomas Carlyle, in discussing their relationship to Jews and to comedy, asserted that Jews did not show the slightest trace of humor at any period in their history. Such statements on the part of European intellectuals are telling, mostly because it's likely that they did rely on traditional Jewish texts like the Bible to make the assertion that Jews aren't funny. The reality appears to have been that neither of these scholars had much contact with actual Jews. It's my actual Jews slide. For if they had, they might have known that the second half of the 19th century, the exact time they were making these claims, was the heyday of a Jewish Enlightenment in Eastern Europe, which produced huge amounts of parody and satire in the service of social progress. This literary movement drew on the rich humor of Jewish folklore and boasted writers like Sholem Aleichem, who wrote the stories on which Fiddler on the Roof was based. One of the reasons scholars like Carlyle and Renan lacked familiarity with Jewish humor and satire was that most of it was written in Yiddish, the language of most of the world's Jews at the time. Not only was Yiddish the vessel for the modern satire of the late 19th century, but it was also the vehicle for thousands of jokes, witticisms, and folk tales, including the stories of the wise men of Chelm, the legendary town of Jewish idiots. For their part, Yiddish-speaking Jews knew they were funny, much more so than their neighbors in Eastern Europe, and this is something that's revealed in the following Yiddish anecdote. When you tell a peasant a joke, he laughs 3 times. Once when you tell it, once when you explain it, and once when he understands it. When you tell a Polish nobleman a joke, he laughs twice, once when you tell it, and once when you explain it, but he never really understands it. When you tell a Russian officer a joke, he only laughs once, when you tell it. He'll put you in jail if you explain it, and he could never understand it. But when you tell a Jew a joke, he interrupts you to say that he's already heard it and that, by the way, you're telling it wrong. Yiddish-speaking Jews knew they were funny, and more importantly, they knew that part of the key to unlocking humor could be found in manipulating language. In 1889, around the same time that scholars like Renan and Carlyle were claiming Jews weren't funny, a Yiddish newspaper in New York organized a best joke contest for its readers. The introduction to the contest reads as follows. Yiddish is known everywhere as a language in which one can express the best jokes, the most hilarious expressions, the funniest anecdotes, and the wisest aphorisms. In reality, the Jewish language is very flexible and contains many words from a variety of languages that can be bent and twisted on all sides. Yiddish-speaking Jews had no idea that European scholars considered them humorless. In fact, it was quite the opposite. They thought they were funnier than everyone else, and that not only was Yiddish well suited for humor, but one of the keys to humor was linguistic flexibility. There was also a sense that, more so than other languages, Yiddish sounded funny. These linguistics matters, combined with an outsider social perspective and the sense that humor could serve a necessary social function as both a weapon and a shield, helped create a very serious Jewish sense of humor. Now, it's not clear when Yiddish-speaking Jews developed their particular sense of humor. Extant text in what is referred to as Old Yiddish, meaning materials from the 14th to the 18th centuries, do not contain much humor. There is, however, mention of Purimspielen, or Purim plays in text and correspondence, although the plays themselves did not survive. It may be hearsay, but it's the best evidence of the existence of humorous materials in Yiddish from this early period. Tracing the history of Jewish humor can be difficult because printing during the early period was expensive and reserved for high-value materials. Jokes and folklore, certainly elements within every culture, were handed down orally as they were not considered important enough for print. While printed material created for entertainment purposes exists in Yiddish from the 16th century, the first known humor publication, a Yiddish translation from German on the town of Schildberg, whose residents were known to be especially stupid, first appeared in 1597. This concept was later Judaized and transformed into the well-known wise men of Chelm stories, but doesn't appear in print in Yiddish until the 1860s. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with Chelm, the legendary town of Jewish idiots, here are two quick tales. Which is more important, the sun or the moon? A citizen of Chelm asked the rabbi. What a silly question, snapped the rabbi. The moon, of course. It shines at night when we really need it. But who needs the sun to shine when it's already broad daylight? Another story. The Melamed of Chelm was speaking with his wife. If I were Rothschild, I'd be richer than he. How can that be? Asked the wife. You'd both have the same amount of money. True, he agreed, but I'd do a little teaching on the side. So you could see, as I mentioned before, the nature of context in these stories. They were much funnier maybe a few hundred years ago. Now, incidentally, I should just add, for historical purposes, Chelm is a real town in southeastern Poland that before World War II had a significant Jewish population. How it came to serve as a town of fools is not entirely clear, but ironically, it was known for genuine Torah scholarship rather than stupidity. Regardless, the stories of the wise men of Chelm serve as a core of traditional Jewish folklore. And here's an example of a transcription of a Chelm story from YIVO's archives. Jewish humor folklore also includes the badchen, or the wedding jester. This is a cultural phenomenon that dates back to the Talmudic period and is connected to the commandment to delight the bride and groom at weddings. As this concept developed, professional wedding jesters came into existence, and by the second half of the 19th century, they became what were the first professional Jewish comedians and were printing and selling booklets of their jokes and rhymes throughout the Pale of Settlement. And these are examples of transcripts written by badchonim, these wedding jesters that are part of YIVO's archives. Another element of humorous folklore is jokes and anecdotes. All cultures have jokes, and of course, Yiddish is no exception. As with the Chelm stories, many jokes did not start out as Yiddish in origin, but made their way into Jewish culture from other cultures. And doubtlessly, there were some joke writers among the Jews who created original material that may have been written down by hand, but which was never printed and didn't survive. The printing of the first Yiddish joke books have much to do with improved print technologies, as well as permission from the Tsarist government to print books more freely, which only began in the 1860s. And some of these authors were the aforementioned badchonim. And this is one example of a Yiddish joke book that was published in 1885, and it was by Avram Goldfaden, who in fact was not a badchen, but is known as the father of Yiddish theater. Now, the folk humor that later fed into the works of writers like Mendele Moicher Sforim and Sholem Aleichem, who mined Yiddish folk culture to create modern satires. The humor found in their work, especially that of Sholem Aleichem, became some of the most beloved among a huge swath of Yiddish speakers. The combination of a high literary style combined with the folk humor taken from the culture of common everyday Jews was perfectly suited to the sensibility of a Jewry that was in the processes of migration, modernization, and urbanization. Now, for Americans who are encountering large numbers of Jewish immigrants for the first time during the late 19th and early 20th century, there did appear to be something humorous about these immigrant Jews with their beards and hats, their gesticulations, and their funny accents. A significant portion of the American humor industry at the time was ethnically based and made good use of these features. And because American humor was already making fun of every other ethnic group, often in very ugly ways, exploiting the Jews fit right in. Using cultural and physical stereotypes, Jews were portrayed as dark-haired, hook-nosed, greedy cheats doing anything to make a buck. While such portrayals would be considered offensive and unacceptable, about 100 years ago, they were completely normal and appeared in magazines and books and on postcards on a regular basis. And I have a number of examples of these. This is a postcard from 1906 You could see the offensive Jewish caricature and the use of dialect. Won't you be mine? Um, it was common for people to use these as regular postcards. Um, this is also from this first decade of the 20th century. Um, it's a postcard caricature of a Jew with who's roller skating on his nose. Roller skates had just come out and they had become relatively popular. And so this was an attempt to fuse the kind of ethnic humor that was popular in vaudeville with a new trend. Um, this is a book of dialect readings and recitations. This is in Yankee, Hebrew, and Italian. Hebrew is really Yiddish, um, and it's full of stories and jokes and anecdotes that are written in a kind of Yiddish dialect. Um, they can be fairly offensive and not terribly funny. There's another example of joke books. You could see how they continue to use caricature. It was very, very common at the time. Obviously, this would never be done today. This is just another example of this. For those of you who don't know what's going on here, you have a man, obviously a Jewish man, who is winking and pouring ice water into a little jar labeled fire extinguisher. That little jar is actually an inkwell. So an inkwell obviously is used for, writing ink. It doesn't hold very much. It holds enough for writing, but not enough to be a fire extinguisher. And you can see on the upper left, he has an insurance policy in his back pocket. What this is referring to is something called Jewish lightning, which was setting a building on fire in order to get the insurance money. And here, obviously, if his fire extinguisher is the size of an inkwell, he's not going to be able to put out the fire. This is another example of these books. This features the work of vaudeville performers who were expert in the phenomenon of the Hebrew comedian. And I don't know how well you could see it, but the man on the cover, Ben Welch, who was one of these comedians, has a fake putty nose and he's got a beard and a hat. He's dressed up as a stage Jew. And this is a book of some of these vaudeville routines. And this is silent. There's no sound to this, but this is the only film in existence of Hebrew comedian performance from vaudeville. And what you see is two peddlers bumping into each other, and they ultimately get into a fight, and it's sort of silly and slapstick, and then they get beaten up by an Irish policeman. That was kind of the nature of this type of performance. Now, within the sphere of ethnic humor, where crude portrayals of Irish, Italian, Chinese, and Black stage characters existed, the stage Jew was an integral part of American humor. But unlike most other ethnic groups which chafed at the abuse that was hurled at them on stage, Jews came to the conclusion that they could actually do a better job making fun of themselves than the Gentiles did. So as more and more Jews joined the entertainment industry during the early 20th century, they began to play stage Jews as well. Actors like Joe Hayman and Fanny Brice put on Yiddish accents and threw in occasional Yiddish words in order to take advantage of the popularity of the phenomenon of the stage Jew. Many songwriters did the same. Composers like Irving Berlin and the Gershwin brothers all wrote Jewish novelty songs, which were recorded by popular performers and sold as sheet music so people could play them at home. This so-called Hebrew comedy was one of the most popular forms of early 20th century humor and marks the first time that Yiddish functions as a comic foil in American entertainment. And these are just some examples of this type of sheet music. You have Yankel the Cowboy Jew. It's about a pawn shop owner named Yankel who goes out west and becomes a cowboy. Get a Girl with Lots of Money, AB. These, many of these can be, sort of very, very anti-Semitic, and you could see the figure on the cover of Get a Girl. He's got a fake nose and the hat pulled down so his ears bend. He's got a sort of nefarious smile. You could see how they exploit these caricatures. Some of them were just funny. Moisture from Nova Scotia, Jerusalem Rag. And you can see the sort of connection between that they're making between Jews and African Americans in this particular case. Both of these songs were written by Irving Berlin, who's better known for other music. Business is Business, Rosie Cohen, and then Cohen Owes Me $97, which is about a businessman by the name, he's called Old Man Rosenstein in the song, and he's on his deathbed, and he refuses to die until Cohen pays him back the $97 he owes him. So, as I said, the stereotypes, tend to dominate in this, in these kinds of music, musical comedy examples. Now, there were some Jewish groups who found this type of ethnic mockery to be obnoxious and unsettling, and they attempted to put a stop to it. At their annual meeting in 1909, the Central Committee of American Rabbis passed a motion to take up the matter of the caricature of the stage Jew, as they called it. Appalled by these popular representations of Jews and convinced that they contributed to anti-Semitism, the Central Organization of Reform Rabbis tried to dissuade theater owners and managers from staging such offensive performances. The irony was that by this time, Hebrew comedy was a completely Jewish enterprise. And an editorial on the subject in a Baltimore Jewish newspaper commented, and I'm quoting here, "In the matter of the stage Jew, we find that in most cases, the actor is a Jew, his manager is a Jew, and he is in a circuit where Jews have the most say. And we may add that audiences are largely composed of Jews too. The thing is Jewish from start to finish. Christians do not demand or even strongly desire to see Jewish acts. As a matter of fact, many of them are so interlarded with Yiddish phrases as to be unintelligible to the non-Jewish audience. They are clearly intended for Jewish consumption, and if Jews go, applaud, and come back for more, what are you going to do about it?" In fact, there wasn't much the rabbis could do. Self-mockery was an integral part of Jewish humor. As author Somerset Maugham remarked on Jews and their comedy, "I was not quite sure of a sense of humor that made such cruel fun of his own race." Now, the Jewish immigrant neighborhoods of New York City, Brooklyn, the Bronx, the Lower East Side were meccas for popular entertainment. Oh, here, I had a couple of extras of these. In a few weeks, it's St. Patrick's Day, so there's a little bit of Irish in Sadie Cohen would be a good tune. Oh, sorry, I have even more. This is a postcard for A.B. the Agent. He was the first syndicated Jewish cartoon character. And you could see that it's what he's saying is written in dialogue. "If you're handing me a 2 for a quarter cigar, give me the 20-cent one and keep the nickel one for yourself." This was how he spoke in the cartoon, and it appeared in most major newspapers in the United States during the 1920s and 30s. Oh, additionally, Nice Baby. This is worth mentioning. This was a book, one of probably about 5 or 6 by Milt Gross, who was also a Jewish cartoonist. Nice Baby is it's kind of a comic novel about a family living in a tenement in the Bronx. And it is about 200 pages entirely written in Yiddish dialect. And Milt Gross grew up in a family where Yiddish was the dominant language. And although he had the best of both worlds, he got to live with Yiddish, and on the street and in school is where he spoke English. And so he took advantage of this to to portray the lives of Jewish immigrants in a really kind of comic but also loving way. And this is very much unlike the material we saw earlier from vaudeville, where it's really meant to be meant to exploit stereotypes and to be offensive. Miltgross also was well known for doing parodies of well-known poetry in Yiddish dialect. And so this is the first page of his parody of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. And I'll just read a little of it because it's funny. When I first came across this book and started to read it, I had a really difficult time understanding it. And I found that I could really only understand it if I read it out loud in the dialect that it was meant to be read in. So it sounds like this. The Raven. Give a look is in the Raven. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I read a tabloid cheery, peaches hinin getting leery, other pictures on page 4. Gradually came a whacking tutai, vital boy miss smacking, with a razor strap shellacking, good for nothing Isidore. Smacks him where the pants is lacking in the rear from Isidore, which has happened oft before. If you know The Raven and you know Yiddish, this is pretty funny. And it's really, this first paragraph is, or this first stanza is about a kid getting spanked, in his Bronx tenement. Okay, what else? All right. So to continue, the Jewish immigrant neighborhoods of New York City, Brooklyn, the Bronx, and the Lower East Side were meccas for popular entertainment. Not only were there more Nickelodeons and vaudeville theaters per capita than any other place in the city, but the streets themselves were full of free entertainment, ranging from amateur performers to fights to drunks, bums, and hookers. Perhaps because of the intensity of this life, Jews living in the stifling tenements of these neighborhoods had a strong desire to get out of the city during the sweltering summers. Beginning around the end of the 19th century, Jewish farmers in the Catskill Mountains looking to make a few extra bucks began hosting boarders during the summer months. This was the genesis of the Borscht Belt, and as it became a more popular destination, Jewish farmers gave up farming and opened up hotels instead. And I think most people haven't seen this. Was the original farm boarding house of Kutcher's farm. Jews flocked to these Jewish-run hotels, also in part because existing hotels were typically restricted, which means they did not serve Jewish clientele. And I can just show you that just to see how these things progress. This, sort of rickety farmhouse became this in the 1960s. So it really advanced. Now, as the Catskills began to fill up with Jews from the city every summer, entertainment became an integral component of resort life there. By the 1920s, the occupation of the tumler was developed. Typically, a comedian, the tumler, or the hotel social director entertained the guests when they weren't being professionally entertained by musical acts, dance instructors, plays, lectures. A huge variety of performances was provided for Catskills visitors. And, by the 1950s, these places became really enormous venues for entertainment. And from YIVO's archives, I just wanted to show some of the photos that we have. Here's Milton Berle on stage at Grossinger's, Danny Kaye. In fact, these are all from the Grossinger's archive. Not a comedian, but I do like this picture. It's Eddie Fisher and Elizabeth Taylor, eating dinner at Grossinger's. Buddy Hackett and a group of friends. And then, of course, Jerry Lewis, who was better known for performing at Brown's, but also spent a lot of time at Grossinger's. And this is him and Jenny Grossinger, who ran the place. So here, we have to ask, what kind of hotel guest needed to be entertained all the time? Prior to the Jewish invasion, the Catskills did have a resort industry, but not one that was known for or which provided entertainment. Why did Jews require entertainment more than other people? Good food and fresh mountain air wasn't enough? The answer may lie less with the Jewish cultural component than with the urban aspect of their lives. At the time the Catskills was in development as a Jewish resort area, the Lower East Side was the largest Jewish settlement in the world and a center for cheap entertainment in New York City. The Jews of the Lower East Side were used to a noisy daily existence full of a wide variety of entertainment in the theaters and on the streets. The calm, pastoral Catskill Mountains evidently wasn't enough. The hotel keepers, who were Jewish themselves, knew their audience and built their hotels to accommodate a need for constant entertainment, of which laughter was the central component. Now, because a large component of the Catskills audience was comprised of immigrants and children of immigrants, the Yiddish language played a significant role. Comedy routines frequently had Yiddish words and phrases interspersed within the jokes. Adding Yiddish to a joke could make a culturally neutral joke Jewish and could also produce a bigger laugh for those in the know. Additionally, because of the changing linguistic demographic and in order to appeal to the largest audience possible, comedians often told jokes in English and then provided the punchlines in Yiddish. Doing this, especially in the case of a vulgar joke or anecdote, mitigated the vulgarity of the joke. Sometimes they would also translate the punchline into English after giving it Yiddish, but by then the bit lost some of its power. Interspersing Yiddish in a joke or giving its punchline in Yiddish also provided an indication of whose culture the performance is situated in. It's certainly in America where English is the lingua franca, but there comes a deeply Jewish flavor to it. And if the punchline requires translation, it's also an instance of in-group humor, one that boosts the cultural status of that particular group and leaving outsiders without a clue. So I'd like to provide a few examples of this phenomenon, which is relatively common in books like Leo Rosten's The Joys of Yiddish, which sometimes uses jokes to elucidate how Yiddish functions as a component of English. But here I'm using texts from two joke books in YIVO's collections, both of which specialize in English language jokes but also have Yiddish punchlines. The first is a spiral-bound notebook called, sorry about that. I did not include that, and I meant to. But the first is a spiral-bound notebook called Mostly Vulgar Yiddish Humor, and the second is The World's Best Yiddish Dirty Jokes by someone named Mr. P. That's not me. Apparently, because of the content, both books were published anonymously, but because of the large numbers of similar jokes, I suspect they are by the same author. And here are some of these examples. It is a Sunday afternoon, and you know what? I just have to give you a caveat here. I'm not a comedian. I'm not even funny. So I'm really just going to read you these jokes out of these books. I'm going to do the best I can. It is a Sunday afternoon. Mr. and Mrs. Schwartz's daughter, Faggy, has brought a young man, Mendel, home to introduce to them. However, during the afternoon, the parents notice that Mendel visits the bathroom about every half hour. Mr. Schwartz says to Mrs. Schwartz, Geh seh, was ist der Mehr mit ihm? Es kann sein, dass ist kranker. This means, go see what's wrong with him. He could be ill. So Mrs. Schwartz follows the young man and asks if he is Mrs. Schwartz follows the young man and asks if he is having a problem, that she noticed he makes frequent trips to the bathroom. The young man explains that he's not sick, but he is so overcome by feelings for their daughter that periodically he must go to the bathroom to relieve himself. So Mrs. Schwartz returns to Mr. Schwartz, who asks, Was war krankes mit dem? Mrs. Schwartz replies, Aza krank auf dir, which means, and obviously this doesn't do good things for the joke. Mrs. Schwartz returns, and Mr. Schwartz asks, what kind of illness does he have? And Mr. Schwartz says, you should have such an illness. Okay, as I said, some of these are vulgar. If you don't enjoy this kind of work, tune out. A shadchan had brought a young man to meet Becky. The young man was interested in marrying a nice young woman and was dismayed when Becky interrupted their conversation by jumping out of her chair and announcing, Ich darf pissen. I have to pee. Later, the shadchan told her that she has to act in a more refined way, that if nature called, she should say something like, Entschuldigt mir, ich darf benitzen die Blumen. I have to go water the flowers. So the next time the shadchan brought a young man to meet Becky, she excused herself by saying, Entschuldigt mir, ich darf gehen benitzen die Blumen und kacken nechet. I have to go water the flowers and take a shit too. Picture the Lower East Side, about 1910 at the Second Avenue Theater. It's the home of heightened stark realism. The house lights dim, the stage lights up, the stage setting is a woman's bedroom. A young lady enters, goes behind a folding screen where she begins to undress and change into her nightgown. She proceeds to the wash basin where she washes her hands and face and brushes her teeth. Then she proceeds to the vanity where she brushes her hair. Then she climbs into bed and she's about to shut off the lights when a voice from the second balcony booms, Was ist? Darf's nicht auspischen? What's going on? You don't have to pee? Obviously, something someone should do before they went to the bathroom. This also references the type of Yiddish-speaking audience that would interrupt a play to say such a thing. It's a beautiful summer day in Warsaw. There are two young medical students sitting on a bench discussing their studies when they observe an elderly man walking in the most peculiar way. He's bent over, walking, leaning to the left, dragging his right leg, the left hand cupping his crotch and the right in his back pocket. One student observes, do you see that man? He's bent over due to a condition of the hardening of the arteries on the pelvis. He must be in great pain. The second observes, I must disagree. This is a classic condition. This man has ulcers. He's in the midst of an attack. That's why he's so bent over. They finally approach the gentleman to confirm which diagnosis is right, and they explain that they have observed him and they repeat their diagnoses and ask which of the students is wrong. The man answers, Ihr habt beide gemacht das, und ich hab echt gemacht das. Ich hab gewollt gebn a Ferz, hab ich ungemachten Hasen. The man answers, You're both wrong. And I also made a mistake. I wanted to fart, but I shit my pants. A men's room in Warsaw in 1910. Two men are standing in adjoining urinals when one feels a stream running down his right pant leg. The man says, Well, how are things in Klodova? The second man says, How do you know I'm from Klodova? The first man says, Wer ist nicht bekannt mit die Balmaluche von Reb Moshe der Linker, der Klodover Moil? Who is not acquainted with the work of Reb Moshe the Lefty, the Klodover Moil? I just want to see how much time we have. In the shtetl, the shamus has come to fetch the rabbi for the minyan for Tisha B'Av. The rabbi has been standing in the marketplace watching the young women go by. The shamus says, Nu medalf shen gain some minyan. The rabbi responds, Oi, in Hals is Tisha B'Av, aber on Häusen is Simchas Teure. These are such examples of this type of joke that provides. They're all told in English. They're two booklets full that provide English language jokes with Yiddish punchlines, and it's this really fascinating phenomenon that sometimes you can find in the recordings of performers like Belle Barth, Pearl Williams, sometimes Myron Cohen, although he did more dialect humor than anything else. And outside of that, there's the phenomenon of jokes that are Yiddish jokes without Yiddish. They're not told in Yiddish, they're told in English. And so what this does is this entails the use of accent or syntax in order to make an English language joke seem Yiddish or appear Yiddish. And this is really an outgrowth of the dialect comedy in vaudeville, as well as the Jewish comedic phenomena of using Yiddish dialect for humorous purpose in the ways that I showed you that Milt Gross or the comedian Myron Cohen did. And so you could take, for example, and this is a well-known joke. Take this joke about Stalin and Trotsky, in which Stalin reads a telegram from his recently exiled enemy, Leon Trotsky. And this is what the telegram read. And Stalin reads this straight from Leon Trotsky to Joseph Stalin, Kremlin, Moscow. You were right, and I was wrong. You are the true heir to Lenin. I should apologize, Trotsky. A Jewish worker in the audience raises his hand and says that Comrade Stalin is reading it incorrectly. Stalin invites him up on the dais and says, "We have a common laborer here who wishes to read Trotsky's telegram in the correct manner with the correct feeling." And so the man reads, telegram from Leon Trotsky to Joseph Stalin, Kremlin, Moscow. You were right and I was wrong. You are the true heir to Lenin. I should apologize. We see here, without even a word of Yiddish, how Yiddish is nonetheless conveyed by way of diction and syntax. Another example of these types of jokes is about Zelda the seamstress, who was walking to the subway after leaving her job in the garment district. As she passed the doorway, a man in a trench coat jumped out and flashed her. And as he stood there exposed, she looked at him and she said, "This you call a lining?" Now, what's interesting here is neither of these jokes use any Yiddish at all, but can clearly be identified as Jewish or Yiddish inflected, thanks to a linguistic phenomenon known as object topicalization, which is a commonly used syntactical form in spoken Yiddish, which involves moving a sentence's object to the first position for emphasis. Now, my favorite example of Yiddish without actual Yiddish is this clip, which shows Emmy-winning TV producer Stan Daniels warming up an audience before a live taping of the Mary Tyler Moore Show. In a bit that was probably funnier than the show itself, Daniels recites George Gershwin's laconic showboat dirge, Old Man River, with the innovation of a Yiddish accent. The result, which layers a classic Yiddish accent onto what is culturally associated with a Southern black man's lament, is pretty hard to watch without cracking a smile. Let's watch this.
There's an old man called the Mississippi. That's the old man I long to be. What does he care if the bull got troubles? What does he care if the land ain't free? Old Man River, that old man River, he don't do nothing. He don't say nothing. He keeps rolling along. He don't plant potatoes. He don't plant cotton. Them that plants them is soon forgotten. Old Man River, he keeps rolling along. You, me, with sweat, with strain, body's aching, rack with pain. But that barge, lift that bale, you get a little donkey land in jail. I get weary, I'm sick of trying, I'm tired of living, I'm scared of dying, but Old Man River, he keeps rolling along.
Now, Stan Daniels' genius here is inflecting particular words, forcibly wrangling what are meant to be melancholic laments into puzzling interrogatives. In doing so, he upends the original intention of the lyrics and manages to create a stark parody of the original using only accent, intonation, and gesture without changing a single word. The emotive nature of Yiddish-speaking immigrant culture, the musicality of the language, and a well-known penchant for physical and facial gesticulation all contributed to perceptions of them as funny. Once such an accent is inserted into the language of a stiffer Anglo-Saxon culture, the speech is rendered absurd. What's fascinating is that the accent itself carries so much cultural baggage that it's not even necessary for Daniels to include even one word in actual Yiddish. The magic of the accent is all about the mix. By intertwining certain linguistic features into their speech, Yiddish speakers created their own variant of English, which in turn informed the distinctive New York accent. But as enjoyable as Yiddish is as a comic foil, there's a downside to it as well. First, it obscures the full breadth of Yiddish culture, which itself is a universe of language, literature, music, and art that can and should be explored. Second, and we can see this in a number of historical dramas that purport to tell the stories of Yiddish-speaking Jews, movies like Schindler's List, Defiance, The Pianist, and there are others. They have their actors speak with accents, but they never speak with Yiddish accents. And this is because the perceived comic nature of Yiddish and Yiddish accents, Hollywood wouldn't dare create a dramatic role with a heavy Yiddish accent, which really, of course, is too bad. By forcing Yiddish into a role in which it's only perceived as fit for comedy, they're denying the language its full breadth of expression. Yiddish, after all, is a language in which all emotions are possible. And for those of us who had the pleasure of having Yiddish accented parents and grandparents yell at us, cry with us, and laugh with us, the full-bodied nature of both their Yiddish and their Yiddish accented speech will always be a fond memory. The phenomenon of Yiddish language punchlines at the ends of English language jokes, as well as the Yiddish accent and the immigrant generation that spoke with, are gone, but the role of Yiddish in American comedy and its storied history continues to remain relevant. I think we can stop for some questions that Alex will moderate. And again, a Freilich and Purim to everyone. And just so you know, this is Alex's son, Elias, who is adorable.
Well, Eddy, thank you so much. And I just echo the laughs and the smiles that we're receiving in the chat. There's so much joy for this talk that that you know, it sold so short at the beginning. You said you didn't even want to do it, and complaints should be directed at me.
Complaints should be directed at you.
I'll take all of the complaints. You know, thank you so much, Eddy. This has been wonderful. We've got a bunch of questions. Let's see, where should we begin? Well, going back to the stage Jew, which is, you know, seems to be a really central part of how a lot of what you talked about first developed here. One viewer asks, why did Jews even tolerate such stereotypes, let alone embrace them? And you mentioned the rabbinic organization that, you know, wrote against this, but maybe you could, do you have any other thoughts you'd like to share on that question?
Sure. You know, sort of self-abnegation was an already a major component of Jewish humor. Jews made fun of themselves, and Jews making fun of themselves was a way of them you know, first of all, they were, you know, wherever they lived, they were a minority, and they were always, you know, mocked and abused and oppressed in different ways. And by taking on the mantle of making fun of themselves, it takes the power away from a negative portrayal. If you are doing it yourself, you know, you are taking control of that portrayal. And it, you know, what's interesting is other groups, for instance, the Irish, you know, who in the generation prior to the Jews arriving in North America, they created a committee to, you know, try to do away with the way that the, you know, Irish were portrayed in popular culture. And they were also, all minorities were portrayed negatively. And so they were relatively successful in having, you know, the number of these types of performances and publications reduced. And the Jews, on the other hand, you know, did sort of the opposite. They said, you know, we can do a better job making fun of ourselves than the Gentiles. And ultimately, they sort of made a business out of it, and they became very successful. And it was one of the ways that they entered into the entertainment industry. it was it's an odd way to look at it, that this is the way the Jews got into entertainment, and especially in the world of comedy, it's an industry that they came to completely dominate, really up until I would say the late 20th century.
This, speaks to the joke that you quoted earlier, which has the punchline is, I know that when you're telling it wrong. It's one of my favorite Jewish jokes.
Right.
But presumably, well, that the setting of that joke is the old world. So
Yes.
presumably, this is a kind of um, a long-standing aspect of Jewish culture that's around for a long time before this particular instance of Yiddish being funny, becoming funny, or the stage Jew.
Right. I mean, look, joking exists in all cultures. It existed in Yiddish before, the advent of the Jewish entree into popular entertainment. Um, Jews told jokes about themselves. They told jokes about others. They took jokes that were told about Jews and transformed them into jokes, their own jokes. Um, the famous joke, he had a hat,
Yeah.
was originally, I think this was a study was done on this joke by, I believe, Richard Raskin, and he found that the joke was originally an anti-Semitic joke.
Do you want
And
to just tell the joke for anyone that doesn't know it?
I mean, maybe you would like to tell the joke.
For what you said, that you're not a comedian, you're very good at telling jokes, Eddie.
And a grandmother is on the beach with her grandson. I'm not that good. Grandmother's on the beach with her grandson, and they're sitting at the edge of the water. A giant wave comes up, smashes on them, and swoops the grandson out to sea. The grandmother is absolutely mortified, and she gets down on her knees and she begins crying and praying. She says, "Oh dear God, please bring my grandson back. Please bring him back. I'll do anything. I'll go to shul every day. I'll give money to the yeshiva. I'll do anything." A minute later, a huge wave comes back and places the grandson back on the beach next to her. And she looks up at the sky and she says, "He had a hat."
Yeah, it's a
You know,
great joke.
meaning, see, it's impossible to tell jokes with no audience reaction. It's terrible.
It's a great joke, though.
It
I
is.
knew I
It's a
saw it
great joke.
coming, Eddie.
But
I was not a good audience.
right. So this joke is an example of what was originally an anti-Semitic joke, that I believe was about a child that was either injured or
I think
killed
it was
at
at a theater
right
show.
at a
The kid
theater.
falls off of the balcony.
Yeah, and the people in the theater take care of him, and they bandage him up, and then they bring him back to the mother, and the mother says, "Hey, he had it. Where's his hat?" And that was meant to
I
that
think
was
it was even darker than that. I
it
think
may
that
it
if
may
I
have been
remember correctly, he dies, and
right.
the theater pays for his funeral, and then they want more money or something, and it's an anti-Semitic barb that Jews are very greedy,
Right,
and
they're
they
greedy. The Jews are
yeah.
greedy and cheap, and the Jews transform the joke um, into a woman that has chutzpah, which is a positive value. You know, she's arguing with God.
Yeah. One viewer just asks if there's this kind of sensibility. Is it unique to Yiddish-speaking Jews of that time? Like in the old world context, did you find this among assimilating Jews who are Russian speakers or Polish speakers or German speakers, or is this or has this been studied? That question.
I don't know if this aspect has been studied. I mean, each Jewish subgroup has its own jokes. Um, you could, in Yiddish joke there are Yiddish joke anthologies from around the 1920s that, are categorized into, jokes about rabbis, jokes about cantors, jokes about teachers, jokes about wealthy people, jokes about poor people. It's like every sort of category has their jokes directed at them and invariably winds up telling the same jokes either about themselves or jokes about other groups who they may want to make fun of. In the same way, um, you will have Jewish immigrants who came during an earlier era making fun of more recent Jewish immigrants. You will have completely assimilated Jews telling different jokes about different kinds of Jews. It like each Jew, like I said, each Jewish subgroup has like its own variety of Jewish jokes. Um, and that's just the nature of, I mean, every culture has the same thing. This is just the Jewish variant of it.
I've heard that Jews are just like everyone else, just more so.
Only more so, right?
Yeah. Um, but what you're saying about the waves of immigration, I have a theory, and I wonder what you think of this about
It stinks. No.
about how Yiddish becomes thought of as a funny language. I mean, you talked about this in your talk at the beginning, how it's not an inherently funny language. Of course,
Right.
it's a language which people live their entire lives in, which has the full range of experience from the tragic to the to the comic and everything in between. But it has become thought of as a funny language in popular imagination, and I wonder if that sort of tracks with this combination of this idea of the stage Jew and of these waves of immigration, so that you have people who are a little bit more assimilated making fun of the using the stage Jew, using Yiddish to make fun of the greenhorns, the
Sure,
new
of course,
immigrants.
absolutely.
And then after a generation or two of that, it becomes associated with this kind of backwater hick from the old country kind of idea. So it becomes associated with that in a more general sense, not just with the stage Jew caricature, but just in general. It becomes kind of tied to the language.
You have that as well, but also, what I think like a significant venue for uh, Yiddish becoming a comic foil is popular entertainment. You can find little Yiddish hints and punchlines in Betty Boop cartoons, in Popeye cartoons, Three Stooges shorts, the Marx Brothers. Um, that phenomenon of and also that phenomenon of using Yiddish in a film or a cartoon that's not Jewish at all um, is a way that the writers of these products um, send shout outs to the Jewish audiences. It's like they're like Easter eggs. They're like, this is a little gift to you. It's a fun thing for them to do. It's like for the general audience, it's just nonsense. And if it's in a comic setting, it doesn't make a difference. It passes by very quickly. But for the Jewish audience, it's sort of a signaling from the writer to the audience. Hey, we're here. This is our product. And so, this, like I said, Betty Boop cartoons of the 1930s, Three Stooges shorts, the Marx Brothers, Mel Brooks, more than anyone else, also took this on. And as a result, in many of, I would say probably all of Mel Brooks's movies, you have these moments where he's using Yiddish. I think the best known one is the Yiddish speaking Indians in Blazing Saddles. Um, but he does it in all his movies, and this is one of these ways that Yiddish became a comic foil. And like I said, at the end of the talk, it's to a certain degree a detriment to Yiddish, because Yiddish is really so much more than this. It's so much broader than just comedy.
There's so much more to talk about. One question from the audience is going back to the very beginning of the talk. You made the assertion that the Bible is a very unfunny text, but this viewer is asking if the wordplay, I mean, the idea of wordplay in the Bible and in biblical exegesis is, this kind of attention to language is a really heightened part of Jewish traditional culture. Do you think that has anything to do with the story that you're telling here?
A little bit. I mean, I mentioned that at the beginning that, outside, in fact, I think one of the things I said was outside of a bit of wordplay,
Hmm.
there's really not much
So you
humor.
mentioned it to just write it off.
Right. No, I did because the
Yeah.
Bible it's not meant to be funny. Um, Now when you're parsing, a text like that, you can be funny, but you're taking, but invariably that humor, I would say typically requires taking whatever's in the Bible out of context. That's what makes it funny. So it's not the Bible itself, and that's why the European intellectuals who I mentioned at the beginning, saw absolutely no humor in Jewish text. They don't look at it as Jews do. They don't read it as Jews do. They don't have the repetitive learning styles that Jews do, and obviously the way that most Jews in Cheder learned the Bible is by translating it into Yiddish. Um, I would have to imagine that there were many instances that those translations sometimes came out funny, uh, either by accident or, well, I would say mostly by accident. But, like mistakes in language can be very, very funny. And when you live in a culture that's translating every day, that is really sure to come about at some point.
Well, I'll have to go back and read the Tseyner with that in mind, Eddie. Um, this is about what we have time for. There's a lot more questions. Maybe we'll stay into overtime a little bit. But
I really just want to know what everyone had for lunch.
well, there's a lot of that explained here too, and I'll end on one of the comments. Just apropos of the Bible, of biblical exegesis having the potential to be funny. One viewer early on in the talk commented that when Moses was leading the Israelites across the parted sea, he said, "Don't eat any shellfish. I'll explain later."
Right, of
So
course. I mean, like I said, that's what makes the Bible. It's the Jews that make the Bible funny. In and of
uh,
itself, it's just not.
which reminds me of another great joke that I really love. Just to, to end on a positive note, have you ever heard the one about why God never speaks to the Jews in Yiddish? He only speaks to them in Hebrew.
Why?
Have you never not
I
heard this
haven't heard
one?
it.
Really?
No.
He doesn't speak to the Jews in Yiddish because he doesn't want them to know that he's a Litvak.
That's good.
So that's a real YIVO joke for you all out there. Eddie, thank you so much. This has been really wonderful.
It's my pleasure. Um, Again, if anyone has complaints, awiser@yivo.org. You can also send him compliments on his lovely child.
Thank you, Eddie. And now that we'll edit this part out of the YouTube. But did you on purpose not translate the Tisha B'av joke because a bunch of people asked about that?
Um,
It's
oh
Tisha
no,
B'av
I meant
in
to.
arts is Tisha B'av in
I meant to.
in Huizen.
I
Okay, well
I
then what?
clearly forgot.
So please, so do that for everyone. In case it was too vulgar, I figured
It's
we would
not.
not put it
I know. No. You know what?
in the recording.
My problem is that I just assume everyone knows Yiddish,
Of
and
course.
the translation is not necessary.
But for
Uh,
those that don't know Yiddish, you can offer the translation now.
right. So the translation is well the joke is, the shamus comes to get the rabbi for Tisha B'av services, uh, and he finds the rabbi in the marketplace looking at all the pretty girls go by, and the shamus says, "Medaf gain davenen, we have to go to shul and pray," and the rabbi says, "In Hals is Tisha B'av, aber in Häusen is Simchas Torah," which means in my heart it's Tisha B'av, which is of course is the saddest day of the Jewish
Right.
year.
It's the day of mourning for the temple. It's been
But in my
destroyed.
pants, it's Simchas Torah, which is the happiest day of the Jewish year.
Day of
I mean, translating
celebration.
these ruins it kills it. It ruins
Yeah.
the joke.
No, it's very funny though. A few other questions that are very specific, but if you don't mind going into overtime, Eddie.
I could. What am I, Bill Maher? I'm going into
Yes,
overtime.
this is overtime. We're streaming on whatever he does that for overtime. Okay, so this was very specific, but did you show a cartoon made by a cartoonist Hirschfeld?
Yeah, Harry Hirschfeld. It wasn't a well, it was a cartoon, but it was a postcard.
Oh, okay, that
Yes,
was one of the postcards.
Harry Hirschfeld was a cartoonist who drew A.B. the Agent.
Hmm.
A.B. the Agent was the first Jewish cartoon character in the American press. I want to say started in like 1918, 1919, something like that. When he first began, he spoke with he spoke Yiddish accented English. And he was sort of a stock cartoon. It was a funny, like a humorous comic strip that appeared in the Sunday papers, the Sunday Funny section. And what's interesting about it is he was very much an immigrant character, but in the 1930s, after 1924, when you have uh, significant quotas placed on Jewish immigrants and far fewer Jewish immigrants being allowed into the United States, it sort of cuts off the the flow of Yiddish speakers to Jewish speaking or Jewish communities in the United States. And so by the 1930s, uh, AB loses his Yiddish accent
Mm.
and just sort of remains a kind of Jewish character.
He assimilates.
He is right. He really does. And I will say also that the cartoon kind of becomes a lot less interesting.
And is this the same Hirschfeld that created this person's asking sketched actors for playbill for Broadway plays? Was that a part of what
No,
he
no,
did?
no, no, no.
Is that
That's
a different Hirschfeld?
right. Yes, so this is Harry Hirschfield,
Okay,
and
that's
the other one
Hirschfeld.
is Al Hirschfeld,
Okay.
who is the very, very well-known caricaturist who did many theater cartoons for the New York Times. I mean, his Al Hirschfeld, I think it's Al. Um, his caricatures are world famous.
Okay. Different Hirschfield or Hirschfeld?
Yeah,
Um, Lots of there's a lot of people called out different things that they wanted you to mention.
I feel like you
For
should. I keep wanting to say there are a lot of angry people out
No,
there.
no, people are thrilled. There's laughs. My heart was warmed. Um, okay, people mention Alan Sherman. People mentioned Seinfeld. People mentioned Bugs Bunny. People mentioned
I mean, look,
Lost in Yonkers and The Chosen.
in a short talk like this,
No,
you're limited as to what you can say.
I'm just
But
giving them shout outs.
Alan Sherman's another really significant figure in this world. He did, Yiddish accented, song parodies. I could say that as a child, the only record that my father would let me play was Alan Sherman's "My Son, the Folk Singer." And he let me play it because he didn't want me to wreck his good records. And he didn't care if this record got scratched. And so he would let me play it. And so like it was the only record I used to listen to. And I absolutely loved it. And I had no idea that the songs were parodies. I just thought they were, funny
Right,
songs that
that's
this
just
guy,
how the
right, that this
songs
guy was
go,
singing. I mean,
right?
I was like 5 or 6 years old. And a few years after that, I was probably like 8 or 9, we had either gone to like a mall or a restaurant and there was a band playing and they were playing the song Greensleeves.
Right. So
And
what a weird rendition of this.
right. So, Alan
I've heard,
Sherman,
incidentally, I've heard this story, but you're
I
telling
know,
it
of
just
course you
fine.
have.
You're telling it just fine.
You're very kind. So Alan Sherman has this parody of Greensleeves called Sir Greenbow,
Yeah.
uh, about a salesman who marries this girl from Shaker Heights. I don't know, but it's a very funny song. Um,
Mickey
and
Katz, someone else, throws out.
Yeah, Mickey Katz is another one of these. But so when I heard this version of Greensleeves, I turned to my mother and I said, "This is a really bad version of Sir Greenbaum." And my mother thought that was very cute and funny. But she thought
Yeah.
everything I did was cute and funny.
Well, it's true. You're adorable, Portnoy. But here's an interesting question. I wonder if this is something you've encountered. But one viewer asks about if code words were used, or other kind of ways of alluding to Christians or non-Jews because of censorship in Yiddish joke books or other contexts, or is that a thing?
No, it's not a thing. And it's not a thing because in Yiddish, you can write whatever you want
Hmm.
because for the most part, only Jews read Yiddish. Speaking is a slightly different matter because there were, of course, always Gentiles who learned Yiddish. Any Gentile who worked regularly with Jews, with Yiddish-speaking Jews, was bound to learn the language at some level. So you wouldn't necessarily talk about them in front of their faces, but because they'd understand it. But for the most part, because Jews had their own kind of private language, they could really say what they want, and indeed they did.
Hmm. Wonderful comment from one viewer, sharing a long reminiscence, but ending in "Thank you, Dr. Eddy Portnoy, Alex, and the YIVO family. I'll give a biscuit tzedakah in your honor."
Oh my God, thank you so
That's
much.
very kind of you. So a few more questions, and then I will let you go take a coffee break. You've worked so hard, you've earned it, Eddie.
You're very kind.
Um, Women. Most of the people that are mentioned in the talk today were men. What are some of the earliest female Jewish comedians or comedic writers? What can you say about women?
Right. Okay. Uh, my brain is blanking, but so obviously you have Joan Rivers. She's like the first really
And also Fanny Bryce. I mean, you mentioned Fanny
right there.
Bryce.
There's Fanny Bryce, there's Sophie Tucker, from this earlier period. There aren't a lot. I will say that comedy, Jewish comedy, tends to be dominated by men, but certainly, yes, certainly Sophie Tucker, Fanny Bryce,
Someone
um,
comments Toddy Fields.
Toady Fields,
Tody
yes,
Fields, excuse
absolutely.
me.
Toady Fields also. Um, who else? I have to think about
Molly
this.
Pecan as a,
Molly, you're right.
yeah.
Molly Pecan was Yiddish theater. She was, a bit in in English as well. Um,
Bella Barth.
Belle
Excuse
Barth,
me,
Pearl
Belle Barth.
Williams,
Jean Carroll.
Patsy Abbott. Um, you have also Selma. What was her name? There were a few women who wrote for TV in the early years in the 1950s, in the early years of TV, who were part of comedy teams. Can't remember her first name. Her last name was Callan. She wrote for Your Show of Shows. Um, but yeah,
Selma Diamond.
Selma Diamond. That's who I'm
Yeah,
thinking. Selma Diamond.
you've got a very uh, knowledgeable crowd all
Oh, it
chiming
was.
in.
What I see? It was Dana
No, it was three
Patoshu.
different people
Dana
saying
Patoshu
simultaneously.
could have given this talk.
All right, Dan. Next time, come up on stage. Joan Rivers. Someone has mentioned. Well, you mentioned Joan. Yeah, there's a lot to talk about.
All
The
right, so
last
we'll do it again.
and you didn't even want to do this.
Who's got time?
Someone commented that it was very Groucho Marx of you to blame me.
Okay.
Um,
Who else should I blame?
he says, "This is outrageous. If I were you, I wouldn't pay." And so some people are saying, "Do it again." That would be wonderful.
All right. Well, I'll tell you one thing that no one is getting their money back.
This was a free lecture.
Yeah.
But actually, apropos of that, I'll end by saying, if for the many people that we've had over 200 people here with us today, and most are still here with us right now, actually. If you've enjoyed this, consider becoming a YIVO member. Support our work. We can do what we do. We can offer so many of these programs for free, thanks to the generous support of viewers like you. So join us, become a member, and members receive, among other things, our newsletter, which has just recently hit mailboxes. You can see the digital version of this on our website, and you can sign up for our spring events. We've got a lot of wonderful events coming up, so come back and learn with us again. And join me in thanking Dr. Eddy Portnoy once again for this wonderful lecture. This has been really fun, really interesting. I expected no less. If you've not read Bad Rabbi and you're still with us, go order Bad Rabbi right now. It's a fantastic book. Yeah, thank you, Eddie.
Thank you, Alex, and thanks to everybody who joined us. I owe you everything.
We've got an endorsement in the chat. I'm a member, and I bought your great book.
Thank you so much.
And 100 Objects. Thank you very much.
And if you don't like the book, you can also complain to Alex.
I bear no responsibility for Bad Rabbi. Well, except for my endorsement. So actually, you can complain to me.
He's handling the complaints.
That's true. That's one of the great joys of my job at YIVO is that I receive the complaints, but I also receive wonderful thanks, and it's most of it is thanks, and we're grateful to have you guys all out there enjoying learning with us and coming back again and again. Seid gesund und stark to all of you.
All right, na freilichen Purim.
Yes, happy Purim.
Heint ist Purim, morgen ist Eus. Git unser Groschen und warft unser Eus.
There you go. Happy Purim, everyone. All right. Until next time, take care.
Okay, thanks to everybody.